Here's what I just want to play, but it's just gameplay. So, which direction the camera is going to go? Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But data make it more.
It's the end of November.
It's pre-recorded. This is what Entrust.
Last week it's cold, but before that
Hi Dave, so I'm running between laptops here physically, so you should now be able to.
Oh, yep, I can see that now. All right, I'll share out my presentation now.
Cool. Okay, I can see your screen, so I'm just going to go to the room next door and get them set up ready to go. But
Oh, okay, sounds good. Thanks a bunch.
is it, as soon as it's got past your live stream, you're ready to go.
Okay.
You can't see us, can't you? You can't see us, you can't see anybody.
Yeah, he can hear us and he can speak. Yeah.
Hi there.
But if you
Hey,
want,
guys.
Mostly can answer questions.
yeah, 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 you're welcome.
Not be able to all the things that cover for secretary.
Are you tested the target?
Yeah, if your session's having the worst time, so you just get frozen.
Hey, how is everyone today?
Good.
Good. I think it's probably 2:15 your time or 2:16 your time. It's 9:16 my time here in the U.S. on the East Coast. Probably get started if everyone's ready to go. Give me a yes or no because I can't see you guys. I can only hear you.
Just a couple of people coming in. Just shut the door.
Okay. Well, I'll wait for someone to give me the go ahead.
Yeah, I think good to go, Dave. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Hey, thank you everybody for attending today. I apologize for not being able to be there in person. That was my intention originally, but other things, personal life got in the way. So, but thank you for attending today. And I hear a bunch of my Entrust colleagues in the room. If you have any questions afterwards, I have the chat session up here, but I'm sure none of you are on Zoom or are watching the chat session here. I do have swap cards running on my phone as well. I may not be able to see those questions, but feel free to ask any questions about anything that I present today to anyone that's in the room or attending the session. So as the presentation says, I'm going to talk about how to add a protective layer using different Entrust products around your VMware infrastructure. To get started, let me give a little bit of background on myself. My name is Dave Stevens. I'm a senior tech sales associate for Entrust, formerly HITRUST. So if any of you are familiar with the HITRUST key control solution, which is a very popular key management solution, I can speak volumes about that at any length of time. You can see my email on the screen. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Just be aware that it is holidays here in the United States, so I may not get to you right away, but I'll promise to get back to you eventually. I also am on Twitter, so if you want to reach out to Twitter, you have my Twitter handle. I also blog occasionally. I did a whole series of blogs last month on key control and just a little bit about what I like to do. So some of you, probably a lot of you folks in Europe are more familiar with Entrust than you are with HITRUST, but HITRUST is where I come from in the acquisition back in January of this past year. So we're coming up on a year's time frame of which we now been a part of the Entrust family. The HITRUST products that I'm going to talk about today are key control, data control, and cloud control. All those products are still around today. They haven't changed. The only thing you may notice if you're an existing HITRUST customer who is using any of the products is that the key control and data control solution, excuse me, has been reskinned. So it's got more of the Entrust purple and blue colors than it has the green and blue colors of the HITRUST side. So here's what I'm going to go over today. I'm going to talk a little bit about encryption and key management. I'm not sure how many of you folks are familiar with encryption and key management, but I'll go over that in brief. I also have my lab up and running, so I'm going to try and go through that and show you some quick views of what that looks like. I also have the ability I'm also going to talk about the automating configuration and compliance. A lot of solutions out there can assess your environment, but not everything can remediate that. So we're talking about how to do that, either doing that manually, or to do that via an automated system. There's some role-based access controls that are built into the virtual center, but I have to say, being a customer or a user of VMware solutions for like the last 15 years, role-based access control is not the easiest thing in the world to set up in virtual center. I have to say that being at HITRUST and now Entrust and using our cloud control solution, role-based access control is actually fairly simple to get up and running. There might be a few things here and there that it might be a little confusing, but once you get the handle of it, it's real simple to add an additional role and access controls to that role. I'll also show view hiding and least privilege access. View hiding is a really cool feature that I'm going to show here. And then, you can't protect we're going to protect what individuals can do for sensitive operations. And I'll refer to that as secondary approval. And I'll go through that in my demo as well. So Vsan and Visa Encryption require a key manager. Who better to serve those encryption keys to you but the Entrust? The solution I'm talking about today is Key Control. Key Control is the key management solution, very popular. Little known fact you may or may not know is back in the day, VMware was an investor of High Trust. They have now since exited that now that we've been acquired by Entrust, but it's still one of the most popular key managers out there today. Now, I will say there is a key manager that VMware has recently come out with. However, that key manager is meant only for Vsan and Vista encryption. I will say that the key manager that we have is KMIP compliant, which means it can work with any other solutions out there. So I've got running in my home lab here, I've got a Cohesity appliance running. We've also tested with Rubrik for backups and data management. Also works with NetApp storage arrays, Dell storage arrays, anything that does KMIP out there. And so we're not more just a one-trick pony like the native key manager or key provider that comes in VMware today. And if you want to use that native key provider, you have to be using vSphere 7.0 U2. If you're not at that level yet, then that native key provider is not an option for you. So this is a great time to talk to one of our Entrust colleagues in the room on how easy it is to set up the key manager. Just a quick view of how vSphere encryption works. You see on the left-hand side here, you've got the object store. That's the key management server. It's deployed in a minimum of 4 nodes, and I'll talk about the architecture here in a couple minutes. But once you have a cluster of key control virtual appliances up and running, you enable the KMIP protocol server inside the system, and you connect to the virtual center. And I'll show you that here in a couple seconds. Once you connected at the virtual center, then you'll be able to right-click a virtual machine, select storage policies, right-click, and then pick a virtual machine. If you want to do the entire virtual machine, you can do that. You can also do individual VMDKs. And then once that is done, Virtual Center will hand off that key encryption key or a reference to that key encryption key to the ESX host under the covers. That ESX host will then be the one doing the encryption. In this instance, we are just a key manager. We're not doing any sort of encryption. Now, if you need to do encryption, say in a public cloud, our key manager can also work for that. And that is our data control solution. And I'll talk a little bit about that further along. For Vsan encryption, let me jump back real fast. What I talked about on this slide is just doing a VM and encrypting that VM directly in Virtual Center. Vsan encryption works a little bit differently. Instead of working at the individual virtual machine, it works at the Vsan data store. So as you build your Vsan out, you've got shared storage across all those ESX hosts. And all you literally have to do is once you've connected key control and Virtual Center together through a trusted connection, you literally edit the configuration for Vsan. There's going to be an option to just enable Vsan encryption. There's also going to be another option to say to format that or clear out the drives. My recommendation is to do that. That way, you know that any data that's on that drive is completely clean, and anything that goes onto it is going to be in an encrypted state as you move the data onto there. What ends up happening is for every disk in those Vsan hosts, there's going to be an individual encryption key requested from us. We're going to hand that off to the Vsan host in this instance. The Vsan host is going to empty off that disk, move on any data that's on it, any VMs, off to other disks in the Vsan host or in the cluster itself. They're going to encrypt that drive. Once that drive is fully encrypted, then they'll start moving data onto it. They'll continue that process over and over and over until it finally finishes the last drive. And at that point, you have a fully encrypted Vsan data store running in your environment. One of the big questions that comes up is how fast does this happen? Well, we're all kind of limited by the speed of the disks, whether those spinning disks, whether those are SSDs. You know, we really can't make that go any faster. It's all relative on what type of IO or how busy your Vsan host or your Vsan or your ESX hosts are if you're not doing Vsan are in your environment. So it can take for a Vsan data store, it could take days or maybe even a week. It all depends on how full that is, how much data needs to be moved around. For an individual VM, it's all dependent on how much IO is being utilized on your host and within your entire cluster. One other thing I'll talk about for key management is virtual TPMs. A lot of folks may understand what a physical TPM is in a host. And if you've been hearing anything in the buzz around today around Windows 11, Windows 11 requires a TPM in a physical machine, whether that's a workstation, a laptop, or a server. Most servers today do have TPMs. Some folks may have opted back in the past to not put a TPM into their host, but nowadays a TPM is pretty much a given if you're going to buy a host today. But for laptops and workstations that we all use for personal use or for work use, you may have a TPM in those. But when it comes to VMs, you can't utilize the TPM on the physical host. You need to create a virtual TPM. And key control is the solution to also provide those encryption keys to the virtual center and the ESX host so that they can add a virtual TPM to your VM. So if you're going to be running or testing Windows 11, whether it's in a VM or on a physical laptop or workstation of yours, you'll need a TPM on the physical machines. You need a VTPM for those virtual machines. You can easily do that. And I'll show you some resources at the very end on how you can watch videos on how all of this works. So with that, let me jump out of here. I'm going to move over to my test system and show you that once you have, let me jump over to my virtual center here, and I'll pick one of my clients in this instance, and I'm going to pick my client 56. And once I have the virtual center and the key control system all connected, then I can easily right-click on the virtual machine, select VM policies. I'm going to edit that VM storage policy. And from here, I will then be able to do the entire virtual machine. I literally just come down, select VM encryption policy, and everything you see on the screen, all 4 virtual hard disks and the VM home folder will be encrypted. The VM home is actually where the NV RAM, the virtual NV RAM lives for that virtual machine. But if you decided you didn't want to do all of the disks in the virtual machine, you can easily click the configure disk. And at that point, you have the option to say, I want to do just this VMDK. Once you do that, you'll be able to click OK. But in this instance, it's going to show me that I also need to have the VM home encrypted. So I'm going to select that. Once I do that, the storage policy is valid. All I need to do is click OK. Now, in this instance, the VM needs to be powered off. And in this instance, I have a user that's logged in that's not allowed to do encryption inside my system. And I'll show you that as I get into cloud control as to why that happened. But if I was logged into Virtual Center with a user that can enable encryption on there, that VM would actually have to be powered off in order for encryption to start. That's actually an implementation on a Vmware side. It's not an implementation on the Entrust side whatsoever, because we're just handing them the encryption keys. Once you power off that VM, then you'll be able to do the same operations again and encrypt that virtual machine. Now, if it turns out, I'll move back over to my slides again, and I'll move over to data control. Data control is a policy agent that allows you to do encryption no matter where it lives inside your environment. And that also includes the cloud, as it shows on the screen here. For instance, when we look at doing encryption, we're going to use the same key manager on the back end, but we don't really care where that virtual machine lives. As long as the policy agent is installed inside that virtual machine, we can encrypt it wherever it lives, and as long as it can talk to one of our key management servers. The real thing that really matters to us is which operating systems are running in that virtual machine. So that would be the major Linux distributions, so CentOS, Ubuntu, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We also support Linux running inside AWS. I don't recall all the differences in Azure, but generally those are what's being run in those clouds anyhow. And so we can easily encrypt those. When it comes to Windows, we also support Windows 10. We're in the process of validating Windows 11. We go all the way back to Windows 8.1 on the client operating system side. For the server operating system side, we support all the way back to Windows Server 2012 R2. That's a very big distinction. So we don't support 2012, but we do support 2012 R2. And if you are on 2012 R2, you're probably getting close to end of life for that anyhow. So you're probably going to get busy planning or starting your upgrade to a newer version of the Windows operating system, server operating system. And then from R2, 2012 R2, we go all the way up to server 2022 or 2019. Actually 2022 as well, I believe we support, which is the latest and greatest, which came up on Microsoft. So we support that today as well. As it talks about, the data control protects the virtual machine anywhere that virtual machine lives, whether it's on premises or in your cloud. The nice thing about our data control policy agent, as I mentioned on the VMware side, if you want to use the native encryption inside the VMware solution, you need to power it down. Our data control policy agent, we don't have that restriction. We can encrypt the virtual machine while it's online. So something like a virtual file server, because there are lots of folks who are doing virtual file servers out there, you may not be able to take that down for an extended period of time. And on the VMware side, God knows how long it's going to take. With data control, we're not going to be able to we'll be able to show you exactly how long it's taking to encrypt that virtual machine. And we're going to do roughly about a terabyte an hour, a terabyte an hour in that instance. So we can roll through the data pretty quickly in your environment. And then all the other things that I mentioned about operating system. We provide deep protection. So when you install a policy agent and register with the key control system, that policy agent will then be able to utilize an encryption policy on the back end. What that gives you the ability to do is determine what happens to encryption keys. How often do those encryption keys get rotated? When an encryption key expires, what happens to it? And also one thing I'll mention is data control and key control can also utilize an Entrust HSM in the background. So if you are one of those customers who really feels comfortable using a hardware solution, rest assured that data control and key control can store those keys also in the HSM. So you have that hardware root of trust. And so we can take care of encryption from the full life cycle, from encryption, from creating of that encryption key, whether that's in the HSM or in the virtual appliance, all the way to sunsetting of that encryption key, whether that's being archived or it's going to expire, or you actually want to remove that key, delete that key altogether. So this is the architecture slide I was talking about. As I mentioned, when we deploy key control, the KMS side, we deploy in a minimum of 4 nodes. We're going to sell you those 4 nodes. Whether you decide to deploy all 4 of them is totally up to you. But I will say, if you're not going to deploy all 4 of them, at a minimum, please always deploy at least 2 of those, even though you're going to have 4 of them. And this is the general architecture. This is our I'd say our reference architecture. Most folks are going to have 1 or more data centers. If you are a newer company, you may not have a data center whatsoever. So everything's running in the public cloud, but you'll still be able to take these key control nodes and distribute those evenly across your cloud infrastructure. Or you can take 2 of those, put 2 of them in the primary data center A, put 2 in the secondary data center, that'd be data center B. And then once you connect those cloud control nodes together, you'll have a 4-node cluster. The interesting thing about our clustering technology is we don't follow the normal clustering technologies or architectures that you may be familiar with. So if you're understanding of active passive in the database world or active passive in the Windows clustering world, we don't have an active passive option. Everything is active all the time. So as you'll see those 4 nodes on the screen today, with a key control client or a virtual center, can talk to any one of those nodes. And if they ask for an encryption key, any one of them will be able to give you that encryption key any moment in time. When it comes to creating an encryption key, we're going to create that. We're going to receive that request. We're going to create that key. We're then going to replicate it to 1 or more of the nodes in the cluster. Once it's been acknowledged that it's been replicated to the nodes in the cluster, then we're finally going to send over that encryption key to the KMIP client that requested that in the first place. So even if you decide like milliseconds to turn around and verify that that key has been there, you can talk to any one of those nodes, and any one of those nodes will be able to answer that request and be assured that that key exists across there. The nice thing too also about our architecture is if, say, one of these nodes were to go down, let's pick node 3 in this instance in data center A. If it were to go down, what's going to happen is the other 3 in the cluster are going to realize that node 3 is no longer available. The cluster is going to go into a degraded state. You'll easily be able to see that in the cluster icon in the UI. It's going to turn from a green heart to an orangish reddish heart. That's going to tell you that the cluster is in a degraded state. All that really means is you're not able to create encryption keys. However, you're able to talk to any one of the other nodes that are still around to retrieve those encryption keys. What we end up doing in the degraded state is we prevent the creation of encryption keys because we don't want to get into a split brain scenario. So if you deal with any storage technologies out there, split brain is a big thing. You never want to be able to create data in somewhere else and then accidentally not get it pulled back into the main cluster. So the easy answer to bring a cluster back into full compliance or into a healthy state is log into 1, 2, or 4 in this instance, since 3 is the one that just went out. You'll easily be able to see that 3 is in a bad state. You'll highlight that node, you'll remove it from the cluster. Once that's completed, then you'll come back to a healthy 3-node cluster. All you need to do to bring it back to 4 nodes is literally just to redeploy the OVA like you did in the first place to get up to 4 nodes, and you're back in business again. The 3rd node, when it comes back online, won't be able to serve any request. Obviously, once until the keys from one of the other nodes has been replicated into its object store. And another thing I didn't mention early on is that object store is protected via encryption keys on the back end. So when you fire up your first node in the cluster, you're going to be requested to have to enter in an admin key. That admin key is going to be used as a master key to wrap the encryption keys for the object store inside the node. And that happens across all of the nodes in there. The nice thing, again, as I mentioned, with data control, if you have any VMs that are up in the public cloud, you can take one of these key control nodes and move it up to the public cloud. You can also utilize the key control mapping that I have on the screen here to state that for any VMs that live in the public cloud, talk to the node first that's up in the public cloud instead of coming back across a WAN connection into your local data center to retrieve a key or to do any key operations in this instance. Just have it talk to the one that's in the public cloud. If that public cloud key control node goes down, like I mentioned in the beginning, it won't be able to talk to that. It'll automatically fail over to one of the other 3 that are still around and be able to retrieve an encryption key or create brand new encryption keys in this instance. So here are the slides. I mentioned some resources. I encourage you, if you are interested in understanding how key control works and you want to play with it in your VMware environment, if you're a vExpert, I'm not sure if there are any vExperts in the room, we offer a 1-year NFR for key control, so you can play with this in your lab. I'll actually be one of the folks that actually approves your request. So when you go to that key control trial, instead of putting a company name or there's going to be an option in there to say your company name because you're a vExpert. Just literally put vExpert in there. In this instance, we're not concerned about your company name. We just want to know that you're a vExpert. That way we can automatically approve it and give it to you as quickly as possible. I mentioned also that there are different videos that are out online. I've done some blog posts and I referenced a bunch of these videos. So go to any one of those YouTube playlists. You'll be able to understand how to quickly get key control up and running, how to encrypt a virtual machine like I showed you briefly in the demo here. Data control, walk through the same thing. You're gonna have to walk through the part to deploy your key control node. Once you have their key control node and the cluster up and running, then you'll be able to watch the video on how to deploy the policy agent and then start encrypting stuff in there. Another a not well-known fact is if you don't have a lab, say you're not a vExpert, you don't have a lab or you don't have a test lab in your office environment, be surprised when I say that there are some folks who don't have a test lab. You can actually play with the key control in the VMware Hands-On Lab. And this is a hands-on lab that was created or was updated just a year ago, I think. But we've been supporting this hands-on lab since the beginning of VMware 6.7 when they came out with encryption in the VMware solution. And if you want to learn a little bit more about how VMware encryption works, this is an excellent blog to go learn more about that on how it works inside VMware today. I know it says 2017, but the same principles still apply today. So I'm going to make a transition from key management and talk about our cloud control solution, where it talks about compliance and secondary approvals, least privilege access, role-based access control, all those cool technologies. But before you start putting anything on it, or as you putting data on it, you want to make sure that your entire cluster is in all of your hosts are in a compliant state. Well, first you're going to usually work with your security team. You're going to define that standard, and they've already have a standard that they've defined. If not, they're probably using some sort of standard that's out there already. Some of the most popular ones are NIST 800-53, 800-171. There's PCI, HIPAA, SOX. We also have something for GDPR. There's several out there. We also have stuff in there for the VMware vSphere hardening guides as well. They're all built into the solution. You can easily select one of those and then customize it for whatever needs you have in your environment. So if your company does not have one, or they have one that's based off of one of those, you can easily select that and then you can customize that. Once you've done that, you can now go off and assess your environment and then figure out where are the gaps based on the policy that you've just created, where are the gaps in your environment, and really understand what's going on. But more importantly, once you know those gaps, you want to be able to remediate those. So you can manually remediate those using the same policy you just created. But more importantly, you want to make sure you don't want to have to do that manually all the time. So let's utilize the cloud control solution. You can remediate that for you automatically. You can do that every hour, every day, every week, whatever frequency you want to pick. And then once you've remediated that environment, you'll be able to get a report also to understand how you're trending over time. You're going to refine that over time. Security is not a one and done sort of process. It's always a moving target in most environments. So you're going to refine that, and then you'll just run through that. You won't have to define it again, but you'll go in, you'll assess your environment, remediate that, and keep it up and running. And I'll show that quickly in a demo here in a couple of minutes. But more importantly, we want to make sure that we want to prevent privileged admin misuse. I have a great story about a prior high trust customer who's now an Entrust customer. We originally were talking to them. They were a financial institution that transacted billions of dollars a day. We had a client team that was talking to them and mentioned our secondary approval piece and least privilege access. They were good on. They said they already had least privilege access taken care of. They had a small team. They weren't too worried about it. Secondary approval, they said, once again, we don't really need to worry about that because we've got a small team. Everybody communicates. Well, it turns out they accidentally had an administrator who's very proficient in Power CLI or PowerShell, and they really wanted to get a quick assessment of their environment and understand just how many hosts do we have in maintenance mode right now. Well, if you understand REST API calls, there's a put command and there's a get command. A get command is just does exactly what it says. It gets information around your environment. But a put is a very unique command. It will make changes. And in this instance, instead of doing a get to understand to get how many hosts were in maintenance mode, accidentally typed put instead of get. And when he ran the script, he put every one of his hosts into maintenance mode. What this does, if you're not familiar with that, I'm sure most of you are, but when you put a host into maintenance mode, it starts trying to move virtual machines all around to another host that's online. Well, if you put them all into maintenance mode, what ends up happening is all the VMs go offline. This meant he took their entire infrastructure down. They went from transacting billions of dollars a day down to less than $500,000 US a day. And it took them several days to come back online. So that same company that said, hey, we're all good, we don't need any help from you, quickly turned around and said that secondary approval thing, we actually could utilize that. Not that they don't trust the users or the admins working in their environment, but they want to be able to accidentally stop things like this. So that's where secondary approval comes in. And we can also monitor admin privileges to understand what folks are doing that, and then to help determine that risk profile so you can build that security policy in cloud control. So what does this look like? And once I get done with this slide and the next slide, I'll jump into the solution and show you what cloud control looks like and how you would define these rules. But today, on the left-hand side, you've got administrators that are using the FAT client, which has kind of been deprecated nowadays, or the HTML client, or you've got tools like vRealize that utilize API calls or any other thing that uses an API call. When that happens, that turns out to be an administrator action, even if it's a cloud orchestration tool or an API-based tool. It's going to perform an operation. It's going to go to Virtual Center, NSX Manager, ESX host, and you're going to get those actions performed automatically for you. Now, one of the downsides is with Virtual Center, a lot of that information is logged. However, it's scattered across multiple areas within Virtual Center. So you may not be able to easily find out what happened. And I'll talk about that in a scenario in a second here. And then the role-based access controls, as I mentioned in Virtual Center, you can do them. They're not the easiest in the world to create, and they're certainly not the easiest in the world to maintain going forward. So what happens when you add in high trust or Entrust cloud control in this instance? Forgot to change the slide. When you add in cloud control, the administrator actions now get sent down to the policy engine in cloud control. Cloud control is a virtual appliance again. We deploy 2 of those instead of 4 like we do with key control. We deploy 2 of those. They run in an active passive scenario in this instance. The policy engine, so an administrator decides that they want to power off or they want to delete a virtual machine. That administrator action is going to go into the policy engine inside cloud control. Cloud control is going to determine, based on who was logged in, whether you can do that operation or not do that operation. If it turns out you can do that operation, we're going to log that inside our engine, our logging engine. And then we're going to then hand that off to Virtual Center and a NSX manager or an ESX host, and an administrator who performed that operation won't even know that it went through the cloud control solution in the first place. But if it turns out if it's a delete action and you're not allowed to do that, or some other action you're not allowed to do, the policy engine is going to see that. It's going to say you've been denied the ability to do that. And you'll see that when I jump into my lab. I did a few tests this morning. And we're going to log all that information. And we're going to do the what I refer to as the 5 Ws, the who did something, what were they doing, when were they doing it, where were they coming from? And then that kind of leads to a 5th why. You're not going to be able to get the why out of this automatically. But once you have the other 4 Ws, you can sometimes figure out a why they were doing something in their environment. And then if they're not allowed to do that, we'll deny that operation and we won't forward it on to Virtual Center or NSX manager in this instance. And then once again, it's easy to see in our logs in one quick, easy view, who was doing all this information or doing all these. And this is just a brief about the logging engine. So let me skip out of doing secondary approvals here and jump into the cloud control solution. So in cloud control, let me stay logged in here. Cloud control, I'm logged into the virtual appliance right now. And when I do that, let me click on one window here first so I don't get logged out of this view. I'm going to come to that for my secondary approval demo. When you log into cloud control or log into Virtual Center, that's being proxied via authentication. And if you're not aware of it, we can do things such as multi-factor authentication, and we can also integrate that with an Entrust multi-factor solution as well. So things such as Ping Federate, Okta, Radius, Active Directory. Those are the main ones right now. There are others out there. Basically, anything that supports SAML 2.0 we'll be able to utilize that for multi-factor authentication. But once you do an operation, and let me jump over to the log here, you'll see in this instance, I tried to, here, this is a great example. This is when I tried to encrypt that virtual machine this morning during the first quick demo. You'll see the Virtual Center admin was the person that was trying to perform this operation. And you'll see that down here as well, how I was logged in. We'll also see the action within Virtual Center that you were trying to exercise. It was the assign VM storage policy or profile. This instance, the Virtual Center admin doesn't have the ability to do that. There's a security team that's supposed to be doing all that encryption, not the Virtual Center admin. I could have easily added it to this role, but in this instance, I don't have it. And then within cloud control, we can actually further break down this overall VM storage profile down into individual finer grained operations. And that's the really cool thing about cloud control is we can break out individual operations, an action inside Virtual Center into much finer grained operations inside the system. And then the role, even though I am logged in with a Virtual Center admin, the role that I have defined in cloud control is a Virtual Center admin, and it defines what they're able to do inside the environment. And we'll quickly see that I was warned and I was denied the ability to do that, as you saw earlier. So if you wanted to see all this information inside Virtual Center, you'd have to probably dig through multiple logs inside Virtual Center. We show it easily in one view. You could also send this information off to a SIM tool. But once again, you need to figure out how to stitch all the different logs that are coming into your SIM tool into a unified dashboard or some sort of dashboard. We can easily see this just as I showed you on cloud control. So that's the logging. I'm going to jump back quickly to my presentation, and I'll show the secondary approval, and then I'll show rule-based access control too at the same time, which is really interesting how this works. So secondary approval, the way this works, normal workflow, we've got the administrator, we've got our virtual infrastructure, we've got cloud control, and we've got our secondary approval administrators. In this instance, I'm logged into cloud control right now as a cloud control administrator, which means and I've added myself into the secondary approval administrators. My virtual center admin is going to be able to do, I'll show you during the demo here, right after I walk through these slides here, how that's going to work. But if an administrator tries to perform an operation, such as deleting a virtual machine, pretty sensitive operation, you clearly don't want to do that willy-nilly. You may want to have, say a junior admin be enabled for secondary approval. This way, if they go off and delete a VM accidentally, you can say yes or no that they can do that. If it's not approved, they get a message saying they're not approved. If they are able to do something that doesn't require secondary approval, just goes through automatically. And then I'll jump in real quickly and show how this works. Oops. Let me move this window over here again. Right now I'm logged in with Virtual Center Admin. I'm going to click on a domain controller, and you'll see that the Virtual Center Admin can see all the infrastructure in this instance. But what the Virtual Center Admin can't do, because he's not a domain administrator, is he can't connect to the console, virtual console of that VM. But if I come over to another view, you'll see the different view. This is the least privilege access, so the view hiding, as I mentioned. Notice that the view for my AD admin who's logged into Virtual Center has a very different view. You can only see the folder where the domain controllers are listed. And if I click on the console, because he's an AD administrator, he's able to gain access to the console in this instance. So that kind of showed two different things in secondary approval in this instance. So actually didn't show secondary approval, but if I wanted to come in here, say a Virtual Center admin should be able to power down a virtual machine, I'll pick this VM here as an instance. This should work. I'm going to take this virtual machine. I'm going to power it off. We'll do Shutdown Guest Os. I'll say yes. And give my lab a few minutes here. It should come back with a view. The demo gods are working for me today. In this instance, they're not. So what would normally happen is you see a view that comes up here, and they would not be able to power off that virtual machine. What you'd end up doing is going into cloud control. You would come over to secondary approval. A view would be in here saying there's a pending secondary approval request. As the administrator, I'd go in to approve that or deny that. And then the administrator who decided to power off that virtual machine would have the ability to go back into Virtual Center and power it off. We can also limit the number of times they can do those operations and the period of time when they're able to perform those operations. So that's a quick demo. Apologize that last one didn't go as well as I wanted it to, but I'll wrap up real quickly here because I think I'm kind of over time. Multiple layers are better than one, as I try to show here. Doing encryption and key management is one of our bread and butter technologies we've always had for many, many years. It's just been enhanced even more via our acquisition by Entrust and the HSM technologies on the back end, so we can have that hardware root of trust. I didn't get to show the demo of how to automate the configuration and compliance for assessing and remediating, but I did talk about them. I quickly showed rule-based access control. Notice the Virtual Center admin, when they logged in, had a view that was very different than what the AD admin had. And then my secondary approval didn't work the way I wanted it to, but what would have happened is if I tried to perform a sensitive operation, which powering off a VM could be a very sensitive operation, there's many others, you would have a secondary approval that would then be able to be approved by a group of administrators in your environment. So with that, I apologize for running over time here by a few minutes, but I hope that today was a great session and apologize for not being there. If you have any questions, please reach out to my Entrust colleagues who were there at the show live today. They can answer any questions for you. And you have my contact information. Hit me up on Twitter. Please take a peek at my blog from a series I did last month. And you also have my email address to get a hold of me as well. So thank you very much for your time today.